Hello, my name is Terry Martin. I'm a senior anchor at DW News in Berlin. That's Germany's foreign broadcasting service. And let me see if I can get this out of my ear, take my mask off. This is not very elegant, forgive me. But it is my great pleasure to be here, and perhaps you can help me with that, at GLOBSEC 2020 at the Bratislava Forum. And see, this is actually a reflection of the sorts of challenges we've all faced here. Yeah, I think I'm getting it. Very good. Okay, we're going to take our masks off so we can have a conversation, socially distanced, but where you can all see us. So, thank you all for being here. Thanks for staying. I know this is the end of 2 days of very intense talks and conversations, and you are all perhaps stimulated as I am and a little bit weary, but we've got a really interesting discussion coming up just now on maximizing security cooperation between NATO and the EU. So let me get straight into the introductions. Joining us from Vilnius is Raimundas Karoblis. He's Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Lithuania. Great to have you with us. Here in our studio, I'll call it, Marian Maja. He is the State Secretary of the Minister of Defense of the Slovak Republic, of course. And joining us from, I can see her now, marvelous to see you, Baiba Braja is with us as well. She is the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. Thank you all for being with us. So, let's just get straight into this. We're talking about NATO and the EU, two inherently complex systems by themselves. And we're going to try to tease out where they might overlap in positive ways and where they might have some challenges to overcome. There's already been a lot of discussion about this topic here at the Bratislava Forum this year. Europe's quest for strategic autonomy, what that means for NATO. I've heard it talked about at least 3 sessions here yesterday. So why don't we just dive in at the deep end of this? And the deep end of this right now happens to be where Belarus and the Eastern Mediterranean meet. We've been talking about that too here a lot already. I'm going to put this first question to Minister Karoblis. Last month we saw sanctions. We saw the EU wanting to impose sanctions on Belarus. That was delayed by Cyprus, which made those sanctions conditional on getting EU support in its territorial dispute with Turkey involving gas drilling rights in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, that is already complex enough, but we're going to start right there because that reflects the sort of challenges that NATO and the EU are dealing with when they begin to overlap. So, Minister Karoblis, you obviously have a very big stake in this. We're talking about you are in Lithuania, which is right next door to Belarus. Tell us, is there what some people are calling a competition of threats between the eastern and the southern members of NATO and the EU?
Yeah, good afternoon once again, and thank you, Terry, for giving me the floor. First of all, congratulations to GLOBSEC organizers that they succeeded to hold this conference, even in this format, PTC. So I understand that it was really challenging in COVID situation, and indeed, I am a fan of GLOBSEC. And last time I had the opportunities to participate in discussions in Munich and the auspices of the Munich conference. It was the GLOBSEC event. We had the discussions on the same European Union common security and defense policy issues and its relationship with NATO. On your question, well, indeed, Vilnius, our capital, is 30 kilometers from Belarus border. And, well, we have the situation, and we had from the conventional defense aspects also some kind of challenge, which was possible to manage. And yes, we have the situation when the factual leader of the country, having the objective and the real problems inside, course, with the will of populations, going against the will of population of the people of Belarus, And the only way, which is usual for the authoritarian regimes in the East, he tried to find to find the reasons, of course, of the problems in other countries, and calling the enemies of NATO, in particular Poland and Lithuania. So I think this is about that, but I think it's your question is wider. So the East and the South. Unfortunately, from time to time, we have this artificial, maybe calls for artificial or understanding or perception of this competition. And unfortunately, so we do not succeed to convince politicians and high-level officials so that it's not about the geography, but it should be treated according to the essence of the problems. Last time, by the way, so we had the discussions in the EU ministers' meeting, defense ministers' meeting in Berlin at the end of August, when High Representative Borrell said that the perceptions of threat regarding Russia are absolutely different to compare Lithuania's understanding and Portuguese understanding. I think it's really not correct at all, so we should treat and assess by the essence. And the essence is such that the character of the threats which we have. And first of all, I like the description, which probably made in 2017 in Reagan's forum in California, that we have three kinds of threat. First of all, short-term threat, which is terrorism and plus. And the methods are usually speaking about involvement of militaries, so through the international operations of different kind, but this is about that. Second kind of threats, and in our case we're speaking about the medium-time threats, which is Russia, which is the only conventional threat now for NATO. In particular, it was clear, so start of the Russia's aggression against Georgia in 2008. We did not succeed to learn lessons about that, but now we have the threats that this threat of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and it's clear that Russia became, once again, unfortunately, after 20 years, 25 years, it's the threat again, and again NATO has the task to come back to the conventional methods, of course, to remedy the situation. And third category, first of all, speaking about China, which is geopolitical and long-term competition. It's the threat of the competitive nature, first of all, despite the fact that we see there's some military aspects also here. It's about long-term. If we have the structurization of the threats in this form, I think we have significantly much more correct picture. Coming back to the East and the South, already NATO is about the solidarity and NATO about the understanding of the threats. It's natural that the countries which have geographically close to the Russia or Belarus in our case have their own priorities in terms of defense, while the countries geographically in the south others. But here also we have full understanding. Speaking about the NATO mechanisms, as the result of Warsaw Summit, which was also remedied the Russian situation, of course we have enhanced forward presence mechanism, and almost all countries from geographically south of Europe are in the EFP, in the Baltic countries and Poland. Right. Italy, in Latvia, France, Estonia, Lithuania, and similar. Baltic police, now we said goodbye, farewell for the Spanish and France, of course, units, while now we have Italians for 8 months, and similar aspects. The same, we have full understanding about the challenges which are in the south. 90% of our troops and operations are in the south in the classical understanding. So Afghanistan, Iraq, Mali, and around it. Close to 40% of our troops and operations are in the Africa and around this. So once again, we don't see the quite artificial division, of course, of this East and the South. More we need to concentrate exactly on the essence of the threats.
Okay.
And according to that, NATO should adjust to this situation.
Thank you very much. That really opens up a lot of territory to get our discussion going. You've picked up on a couple of things that I find that could be fruitful for the rest of our discussion. One, you mentioned a number of common threats, and these threats apply not just to NATO, but also to the European Union. You face similar threats. However, you mentioned that member states within both organizations have different priorities, and you said you tried to suggest that there wasn't really a conflict between the East and the South. Well, we can talk about that in a little more detail, but I want to bring our discussion back to this particular linking of what is going on in the Eastern Mediterranean to what is happening in Belarus. I mean, the message we get, of course, is that everything is connected in some way, but these two things were connected in ways that were affecting the operations of the European Union, and of course, it was an interesting question for NATO as well. So I wanted to ask you, Marian Maya, from your perspective, when you heard that the sanctions that were being prepared at European Union level on Belarus were being impeded by something happening that has really nothing to do with it, what was your reaction to that?
Well, for all of us, of course, I'll come back to the question of threat perception. It's of course that all countries have their own threat perception, and it differs between the countries. It's natural, and it's something we have to live with, and we have to discuss. That's why we've got different formats. Regarding Belarus, yesterday there was the Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was here getting an award, and of course, for Slovakia, but for Central Europe as such, it's something really close. And when the situation was worsening in 2014 in Ukraine, it was something affecting countries like Slovakia, and that's why we were aware that we need to do something both on NATO or EU side. So that's why also in case of Belarus, it's something, it's a matter of values for us. It's important to send the right message to Belarusian people and to also wider area around the European Union and Europe, that this is something we are not okay with, and we need to do something. So that's why we are trying to persuade also our friends and partners in the European Union and also in NATO, of course, when it comes to NATO's actions, that it's sending signals is very important, and that's why we need to be consistent. Of course, some countries can differ.
I get that part of it. You know, that all makes perfect sense to me. But I think for many people, when they look at that particular situation in Belarus and the implications that it has for Europe and for members of the European Union, particularly for people in this region, the public looks at that and thinks, okay, well, yeah, okay, sanctions. Other people are already applying sanctions. We have, we have Canada and the UK already moving forward on that. The European Union, however, is really called to task here. Why would they not be able to impose sanctions because of something happening in the Eastern Mediterranean? What does that tell you about the functioning of the European Union?
It's a hard question, because finding first consensus on action and then the right tools, it's not easy, of course. It was, I'm getting back to Ukraine, the debate right after what happened in Crimea, especially in NATO, it was not easy. And there were countries opposing our joint action. So this is not easy when it comes to any crisis, when it comes to any situation challenging such as Belarus. yes, from outside it could be. It could be said that nothing's changed, and it's just a symbolic step.
Okay.
Of course, sometimes it's symbolic, but we are just at the beginning of the debate. So it doesn't mean that we will not get to some harder or tougher decisions.
Okay, we're obviously talking about European foreign policy here at this point, and there is a discussion ongoing about whether to have qualified majority voting instead of unanimous voting when it comes to that, which is what that reveals a little bit to me about the European decision-making process. I want to bring in the Assistant Secretary General here. I wanted to ask you what this looked like for you from a public diplomacy point of view in trying to, as NATO, saying what is happening in Belarus is connected to what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean. How has this played out for you from a public diplomacy point of view?
NATO is an organization and an alliance that is ready to defend its populations and territories, and that's a so-called against all threats, so-called 360 degrees approach. So it doesn't mean that if there are challenges in the east that we would have to choose not to respond to something that is happening in the south. So that is, in terms of the abilities and the concept. But also in terms of the alliance as a political organization, so not only military alliance, but also political alliance, you have seen the very active roles that NATO has played in deconfliction talks in East Med, and they have been this far successful. So it was not the first time NATO played that role, and it was done both through the military and political channels. In the same time, obviously, we are watching very carefully what is happening in Belarus, what is happening in Russia, and what does it mean for NATO. We wish success, obviously, to all political efforts that the EU is doing on the diplomatic front and political front in mediation, also in the East Med on other issues than the NATO. So it very clearly shows the complementarities that we have there. But again, both EU and NATO are looking out for the same interests, which is the safety, security, defense, and prosperity of our peoples.
Okay, so it shows complementarity in your point of view. I find that very, very interesting. Anyway, we'll just leave that where it is. I think this is a really curious coupling of things that are happening within the spheres of NATO and the European Union that, at least from a public perception point of view, is sometimes difficult to communicate for me as a journalist, but I think for the public to also digest. Let's get in now to the details of the cooperation or lack of cooperation between the EU and NATO when it comes to security and defense. A while back, the EU Parliament published a report called European Defence Union. I'm sure many of you have already looked at it. The report talked about NATO being the first pillar of any such union. It played up the overlapping interests and possibilities for synergies there. A former foreign minister of Estonia, who was rapporteur for the report, he said a stronger European defense cooperation will not weaken NATO. On the contrary, both organizations will strengthen each other mutually. We heard basically the same message coming from Jens Stoltenberg here yesterday. I wanted to ask, but there's another school of thought on that, of course. There's the Trump administration's perspective on that. And I quote from a letter coming to Federica Mogherini last year, and it says that Washington is deeply concerned about what is happening with the European Defense Fund, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, and it said those could produce, and I quote, produce duplication, non-operable military systems, diversion of scarce military defense resources, and unnecessary competition between NATO and EU. So how does this work? Let me put that first to Minister Karoblis in Lithuania. How do you see it? Do you see it as full complementarity, or do you see it as creating problems?
Well, I will start from the beginning, maybe. Lithuania was traditionally one of the most skeptical countries regarding the ambitions of the Europe's common security and defense policy. And together with Brits, we were opposing quite a lot of issues in the past, including when my previous position as the ambassador to the European Union during 5 years. But yes, in current situation, we see the chance for CSDP exactly about the complementarity role here. It's absolutely clear that the European countries has the problems with the defense spending level, with the capability building, with the readiness, and of course, so this is the question, and Americans absolutely right, raising this issue. European Union countries need to be too strong in terms of defenses, without any doubt. And if the European mechanisms could help here, if they could facilitate the increase of the spending of the EU member states of defense spending to building the capabilities, also facilitation, why not? Of course, we need to use these chances. And the issues of, I think, defense industry, PESCO cooperation, so with usually smaller countries. So if they help the efficiency, of course, it's the right approach what we're doing. So are we on the right approach? I can't. Will these mechanisms bring it to the competition? Yes, in terms of the perspectives, I think there are quite good chances. The efficiency is not good so far, but so we're starting the implementation phase only. What is really important, and rightly mentioned, the issue of PESCO and similar aspects. Is the European Union close? And this is only about European Union, or European Union is open also to the access of other countries to European Union mechanisms to get the convergence. Well, I think so. We see from Lithuanian perspective, and not only that, we could be efficient if we are open. And the European Union mechanisms, like the Horizon, for example, R&D, showed its efficiency by openness, by participation of other countries. And I think this is the main question. The cooperation between NATO countries is such that really we need the continuation of close relations in this area, so including on defense industry. For example, Lithuania now is buying project of the anti-aircraft missiles. The program product is from Norway. Missiles are from the United States. Well, so this is the example.
Okay, so there's a little bit of skepticism coming there about this whole project. How do you see it?
I'm a big fan of deepening European cooperation when it comes to security and defense, but I'm also the strong believer in NATO. And I think this debate is a little bit artificial because everybody knows, or it's obvious from not only my point of view, but also from the point of Slovakia and the Slovak government, that NATO is a guarantor of peace and security in Europe and of the collective defense. So nobody, when discussing maybe joint projects inside of the European Union, is not doubting. Maybe there are some countries who are, or maybe have an ambition to do something more, and then pushing debate about strategic autonomy or European armed forces. But for us, it's just about making European pillars stronger inside of NATO.
And that's a viable thing to be doing. You think that can be done?
I think so. I'm confident it's possible, but at the same time, we have to admit that there are many problems and sometimes overlappings. We've got more than 40 PESCO projects, and many of them are not moving anywhere. So we have to be critical, of course. But it doesn't mean that Europe or European Union shouldn't bear more responsibility. This is something United States were asking for decades. So that's why, for example, speaking on behalf of my country, we put 2% of GDP into governmental manifesto to say strongly that we are committed NATO member, but at the same time we are trying to push for stronger European cooperation, and I don't see a conflict between those two things. But at the same time, we need to be vigilant, not to make duplicated structures, not to make duplicated efforts, and to make complementing effort on both sides.
Okay, the U.S. is obviously the strongest partner within NATO. What the U.S. says is important. We heard this morning the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas saying that whoever wins the election, it's likely that the U.S. will continue to pull out of its international role, which was an interesting statement to hear him make. This is, from a European perspective, we're hearing a lot of pressure being put on Europe to try to develop greater autonomy in a number of different areas. Strategic autonomy is one of them. That's the big umbrella concept. But for NATO, when NATO watches these observations, and we heard already from the Secretary General yesterday what his views are on the developments within NATO, but I wanted to hear from you, Barbara Braja, how NATO is trying to work with the European Union to assure that these developments within Europe are going to be complementary and not a competition.
Thanks for that question. Obviously, you heard from SecGen, but also there have been quite a number of other occasions where very clearly those developments in the EU that improve burden sharing and bring new capabilities are very welcome. We know that after Brexit, 80% of defense spending in NATO will come not from European allies, non-EU allies. So obviously there is big space for improvement. NATO covers populations of 1 billion and provides protection and defense for them. So more capabilities, more burden sharing, more contributions, cash and capabilities, very welcome. Obviously, those capabilities have to also be interoperable with NATO. They cannot be just not accessible to NATO allies. So there is an interoperability element in all of that. Also, when we think about the political cooperation and the very basis of what the EU and NATO stands about, we are alliances of democratic states. This is in the NATO statute. It's in the European documents. We are there to protect our democracies, to protect our societies, to protect our values, and we do it with mutually complementary means. EU ensuring the growth and prosperity, the access to the markets, and a variety of other different means. And NATO, of course, is political military alliance. So we don't have to look so much at the differences, but actually how to be able to work together. And that is what we do also on staff-to-staff relations. And COVID has brought us closer than ever. We have regularly in the North Atlantic Council, we have dialogue with the EU officials, with the commissioners. The Secretary General meets with the President of the Commission, with the President of Council. And it's just, it has never been closer, to tell you frankly.
Security and defense is coming up in the next budget of the European Union in its multi-year framework, financial framework, the MFF. It features as a separate section for the first time. Some are saying this is really a radical break. It was long considered a political no-go, a taboo. Just wondering your views on how significant that development is. Minister Karablis, how do you see this development in the budget that the European Union is now budgeting for security and defense in a way that it has never done before? How important is this?
Yes, it's a reflection of the EU's ambitions, which in general we really welcome. But, well, it was some kind of mechanisms and even financement from the EU funds, first of all for European Development Agency, but also through the Athena mechanism. So, of course, it was, as a general rule, outside theoretically the EU formal budget, but nevertheless it was the European financement. Now we'll see, so with some mechanisms, but for us the biggest issue is military mobility, of course, which is for us is the sentence, and truly speaking, so the military mobility, which is strategic, both from deterrence and from defense point of view in Europe, having this conventional threat of Russia is about the speed, having in mind the limited, of course, forces which are in Europe. The question is number of hours when the forces could move from one country to another. And here we have, so really situation varies in the Baltics. We have just hours for issuing of the permits. For some countries, 10 days crossing the border. In some countries of the European Union, even the permission from the parliament, almost the permission of parliament is required. So the question is about the procedures, and the European Union mechanisms with directives and regulations is one of the engines. Another is of course, critical infrastructure. European Union has the mechanisms, which is financement of infrastructure, which is going well. The question is how to transfer the military requirements, which is formulated by Nato to the European Union. And also Nato does not have the mechanisms how to implement, the European Union has good. And in our case, we think that it's the biggest chance of the European Union to strengthen realistically, in real way, so this security and defense. For us, frankly speaking, this is the litmus test for the CSDP. So military mobility, if European Union succeeds with the military mobility, we have the leadership and significant strength of the EU in these terms. If not, sorry, we have the failure, and well, we practically, I think the chances for the European Union are quite limited here. So we have 1.5 billion for that, for military mobility. It's quite small amount, but we expect that it's the beginning, and by that, European Union will be stronger.
That one part of it, military mobility, that seems to be where there's some consensus between NATO and the European Union that this is a good thing. Everybody can use that. That particular part of the budget was trimmed down radically, along with other parts of the budget. It was cut by 74% from the original Commission proposal down to 1.5 billion. I want to talk about one particular instrument in this budget, and that is the European Peace Facility. Some are saying that this is the most significant part of the budget that is being developed within the European Union. This EPF, it's a new budget instrument. It's going to allow the European Union to finance actions, if I understand this correctly, in the field of security and defense, and it's a novelty in many ways because it includes the possibility for the European Union not only to train, but also to equip partner countries. How significant is that?
It is significant, although we have to say that there is still no consensus, the final consensus, I would say, of all member states on the final provisions of using this money, because especially in that term, what you mentioned, there are some question marks from some countries, but I hope that until the end of this year we will find a solution, and everybody will be satisfied with using this money. What is important that it's widening the scope of actually. Of the tools where the money can be used, and also it's because before it was African peace facility. It's changing actually the scope of geographical scope of direction for potential use of this money. So now there are more opportunities, or for at least for those who are supporting this original proposal. It's something which could help European Union to be more visible and to be more effective as well. Of course, regarding the amount of money, it's lower than also we expected, and it's not only about the European peace facility, is also about EDF and military mobility, as Minister Karoblis mentioned. So this is something European Union really needs to work on if we'd like to be real partner and a real player in international relations, and to somehow want to influence strategic issues in the world or around, at least around Europe. We need to invest more, not only from national budgets, but also from joint European Union's budget.
Okay, just to give you an opportunity, we still have the Assistant Secretary General with us, Ms. Brajic. Would you care to comment on that? I'm just wondering how that looks from NATO's perspective, the notion of the European Union, which, as you pointed out, with the departure of the UK from the European Union, you now have only 20% of what is left in NATO coming from the European Union in terms of the member state budgets. How do you see that NATO, or that the European Union is now going to not only train but equip other countries in military terms? Possibly. Of course, the budget's not passed yet, is it? Yeah.
Voila. We will get there when we get there. But what I want to say is, of course, the investment in military mobility is most welcome. That has been something where we also informally and formally we have discussed with our European counterparts, and mobility, resilience, countering hybrid threats, countering disinformation, anything that promotes readiness, that promotes interoperability, and also that ensures that our societies and infrastructure are ready to support the military side is most welcome. And there are instruments where the EU can provide, or through EU can provide a lot of investment and a lot of development. Another field will be we do things that NATO is the best platform for transatlantic developments on emerging developing technologies. But obviously, EU also has a role to play. So again, we have a very close dialogue with people in the respective fields. So on be it on artificial intelligence, be it on autonomous systems. And we just have to, again, understand that working together is much, much better, and we can get much further to defend the very basics of our societies than not. Simple as that. And as for the defense spending, we have seen 5 years of real growth in defense spending across NATO, and we do expect that to continue. We have done some polling. The societies, the audiences in NATO countries do see the positive role and recognition that the alliance and our military and NATO as such has played in responding to COVID. There is a feeling of increased threat, security threats, possibly connected to COVID, but also there is a great interest, large interest of the part of population to continue support defense spending. So as far as we are concerned, obviously both in the EU's and NATO's interest, it is to continue on that path, because if there is no security, if there is no defense, it's very difficult to build prosperity.
Mr. Karoblis, I'm just going to put one question to our group before we bring in some questions from you. If any of you have questions for any of our participants, please just raise your hand and I'll try to collect these questions. And we have someone with a big boom mic walking around, or two of them, who can help you give a socially distanced question. One of the questions that many people have when they look at the European Union, we know that not all members of the European Union are also members of NATO. I think 6 members of the European Union are not in NATO, and a couple of them are significant. There are different reasons for that. We know about that. But still, people are asking, well, why does the European Union really need to develop its own security and defense identity and make it a robust force when there's already NATO? What's the whole idea behind this? What's the purpose? And I'm wondering if you could just maybe talk about that in more specific terms. Minister Karoblis, why do you think the European, I mean, I know that you're skeptical, and I know that there are a number of skeptical countries to a degree, but you're part of the European Union. It's moving in this direction. The budget is going to go that way. Why do you think this is necessary?
Well, in the very idealistic, well, first of all, I'm not skeptical. I think that this is the real chance for the European Union to take its niche. But in the ideal world, I think, yes, for the defense issues, so this NATO should take the responsibility, or EU for other issues. We have quite a lot of slogans, actually, so this division of responsibilities between NATO and the EU. One is in the past that NATO is for defense, European Union is for security. And another is, I think, the phrase quoted by our president, Mr. Gitanas Nausėda, is that, well, it could be treated as a joke, but nevertheless, it's that NATO is for the security, NATO is for life. This is the essence of our country, but European Union is for the better life. So probably this is kind of a division. But yes, you mentioned that, and well, what we see, it's the only complementarity of the EU role for defense issues as such. Yes, the advantage of the European Union, they have specific mechanisms, so in particular on hybrid threats, in US threats, technology and similar. And this is the strong point of view. And of course, the niches, EU operations, for example, where the European Union should take the responsibility. NATO is not able, because of some reasons, NATO also can't cover all the world, if possible to see so. Military mobility, I mentioned also. So, and here we need to find the solution. So you mentioned 6 countries which are not of the European Union, which are not members of NATO, but also please take into account that 2 countries, Finland and Sweden, they have special partnership with the European with NATO, and they are active participants in NATO's mechanism, strengthening the defense. And it's really a full understanding, of course, of the threats they feel about that. Yes, we have some countries of the European Union which are a little bit skeptical regarding increase of the euro, but well, it's their tradition, their view, and I think that well, it is kind of compromise and agreement. So that they could have specific attitude to that, and because of few countries, so the process could not stop. And here we should not apply one-size-fits-all approach. But generally, we need to look what is possible to do generally with the majority on this very, very important issue.
I mean, we heard from your boss, the defense minister, yesterday saying, with respect to the European Union trying to develop its own defense and security identity and structures, you're saying, well, sometimes it works, but we need to be careful. That was how he put it. So there's a certain caution, at least caution, in approaching this. And I wanted to ask you, State Secretary, is this, how much caution is needed there? I mean, why is there such caution called for when it comes to the European Union attempting something? Is it because of the structures, the decision-making processes being so complicated, or what is it?
I think it's mostly related to some failures in the past. So there were strong ambitions in last maybe 20, maybe more years, and those ambitions were not fulfilled in the European Union. So that's why we try to, and I was also saying that we need to be critical, because a couple years ago, when PESCO was launched as the new initiative mostly pushed by France and Germany, it was presented as something, as a breakthrough, and it could be a breakthrough, but at the same time, we need to be vigilant. So I don't know how much cautiousness is enough, and how much would be too much, but we have to bear in mind that fulfilling the commitments which are on the papers and have been presented before means investing every day, money, effort, personal, everything, and only then we could succeed. So that's why, although I said that I'm a big fan of European cooperation in defense, at the same time I'm aware of some failures in the past, and we need to bear it in mind.
Here, we've got one question that's come through here, and if there's a question in the audience, again, please just raise your hand. I'll try to catch you in my eye, and we'll bring a microphone around to you. But we do have one online question here that I would like to pick up on and put to the Assistant Secretary General Braja on the question of NATO-EU cooperation. And here's the question. It's from Anka Agachi from the Atlantic Council. How do you conceptualize NATO-EU cooperation in the case of novel security threats like climate change, pandemics, resource scarcity, and more? Kind of broadening it out to take into account other things. Go ahead.
Pandemic, obviously, we were all sort of caught in a situation where we had to respond how we could in the best way. And as for the EU, obviously, the health is a national responsibility. So the EU as an institution at that very moment couldn't respond right away, except eliminating the budget borrowing limits and responding, with a financial package and regulatory package. So most of the national responses were at home. And as for NATO, also NATO is not the first responder to a pandemic crisis, but NATO had capabilities. It was able to fly more than 350 flights to support civilians, to support our medics, to support allies, but also to support partners. So we were supporting countries not only within NATO, but also within the EU and outside our borders with the capabilities that we had. So, it worked out very naturally, and there was again a lot of cooperation and coordination among the countries and among the institutions at that very time. On climate change, again, NATO is not the first responder, but if NATO doesn't take climate change seriously, our overall security environment will be changing, and we just have to incorporate those changes and understand what we can do to also contribute. So be it in the technology, equipment, in policies, whatever we do. And it's a sort of integrated action and thinking. On the EU side, the Green Deal very much shows what the EU thinks, and it's a very welcome development, again, both through the green taxonomy package, meaning that you have various incentives for private sector, how to implement a number of concrete initiatives, whether it's borrowing, whether it's promoting certain types of activities of private sector and the banks and insurance companies and others, to make sure that the commitment of 2050 to be carbon neutral, at least partially, is implemented. So again, we are going very much the same way, very much the same way. We have the same interest to make sure that for example, climate change, where EU is only 12% of the emissions, and where the emitters are elsewhere, is that we talk to them, that we get them on board, and countries like China become part of the solution and not a problem.
We only have we have about 6 minutes left, and during that time, I would of course welcome any questions from the audience. But I'd like to cast our vision a little forward. We're caught up a little bit in detail of how these two organizations are supposed to cooperate with one another when there are very difficult decision-making structures already within the European Union. So there's that to be resolved. But looking ahead, I'm just wondering where things will be, say, 10 years down the road. We've got our next 7-year budget coming up in the European Union. Where will things be, say, 10 years down the road? Minister Karabulis, how do you envision EU-NATO cooperation? Of course, it's a changing world, but how do you see cooperation evolving down the road, 10 years from now, say?
Well, evolving and making prognosis what will happen after 10 years, we need to look a little bit back, probably so 10 years back, I think. And 10 years back, we have practically nothing. All attempts, all real attempts of the coordination between these two organizations actually were on the level practically nil. This was one of the biggest blockages which European Union has. And from then, indeed, so the relationship was very intensified very significantly, and already so they bring the fruits, at least the perspectives. First is about the military mobility, which is the greatest area of the cooperation. So this new areas of cyber, the area of propaganda tackling and similar aspects. So really we have quite a lot of issues, and I think that now this level of cooperation between the EU and NATO is the best ever. Regarding the future, of course, we need to look what kind of the threats will be in the future, and of course, now we have this testing time. Well, I mentioned military mobility. If it fails in the European Union, here we have very big hopes that it will develop, but in case of failure, it will be failure for all as this CSDP. And prognosis so regarding increase of relationship between NATO and the European Union. But present mechanisms which are on the table, I think European defense, so this compass issues, card issues, which are complementary to NATO issues, I think that is the way forward, and really we need to look how they will work, and on that basis to build further perspectives. We are in this, I think, very ambitious, but nevertheless first period of so close cooperation between these two organizations.
State Secretary Maya, when you look 10 years down the road, do you see, say you are defense minister at that point, just
hopefully not.
But presuming you're still working in the defense ministry, perhaps in your current job, perhaps somewhere else, but when you're looking down the road 10 years, do you imagine yourself plugging yourself in, not just into NATO, which you're already hardwired into NATO, the whole defense apparatus within your country and the region, but what about the European Union? Do you see this as something that will help you, or is it to become a bit of a burden in trying to think how to attach that to an existing structure that is already complex enough?
Maybe the simple answer or the question would be whether there will be another crisis close to us triggering the development. But the more serious answer, yes, I hope so. I hope so, that European Union will be something effective. So that's why I think that we shouldn't spend more time by discussing armed forces, strategic autonomy, something which is spending our time, and it's heading us nowhere. We have to invest to the real projects. We have to find several strategic projects which will be really joint, and every member state will have or would have some benefits from them, from those, and of course supporting activities of of European Union, not only like pure military activities like operations in Africa, for example, but also activities like countering disinformation, cyber, I don't know, fighting terrorism, exchange of information, and so on and so forth.
Great. I'm going to be able to give the final word to Barbara Braja. Your vision for the future in terms of NATO-EU cooperation? We have about
As you rightly pointed out, I think we have to get away from thinking about the structures and institutions. We have to look again what is in the interests of our people. Everybody in our countries, be it NATO or EU, wants to live in peace, security, and prosperity. And how to ensure that is a task for both institutions or organizations, if you will. And we have to look at the threat vectors. Obviously, they will be different from what they have been in the past. And we have to look at how to maintain our technological edge, so emerging technologies, and especially disruptions coming with it. We have to be very clear in terms of regulation, how we get regulation in place, be it by the standardization or by smart regulation on digital, which is not going contrary to our defense interests at the end, but also to ensure that there is interoperability of our defense forces. And in terms of that, it's very, very, very important that our non-EU allies in NATO also get access to what is there in the EU, if there are capabilities that are being developed, and the other way around, that our EU partners feel secure enough that they can speak with us, and there is a really good relationship among the countries and people and institutions. So as Secretary General of NATO has put it, it's the Vision 2030 with NATO that has to be more politically, militarily strong and much more globally engaged. And that can only be done all together with partners such as the EU, such as other democratic states in the world.
Barbara Braja, thank you very much from Brussels. We really appreciate you joining us and giving your thoughts on that. And to all of our guests, of course, to Raimundas Karoblis in Vilnius, thank you as well for joining us from up there, and Maria and Maya here in Bratislava. And thank you, of course, to our audience. But don't leave yet. We're not completely over, because there's one more bit left in this session, and it's perhaps one of the most important parts. It's a bit sad, because we are about to conclude this amazingly successful GLOBSEC. Despite all of the difficulties that we've faced in trying to come together here, it's a remarkable testament to the will of the people and the resilience of this organization too, and its organizational acumen that is able to get so many people here and to be joining us. Anyway, we're going to go and sit over there, right there, where I see two seats available for us, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Robert Fasch, who is, of course, the president of GLOBSEC. Thank you.
Thank you for the great debate and the great 2 days we had here in Bratislava. I'm not going to say anything clever, because all the clever things has been said already. So I will have only a few very ordinary points as I'm evaluating this conference. So let me just say that, firstly, I think the success already is that we did it, regardless of the pandemic. I think it's a great success. We took a risk, and we did it. And I think it's showing the resilience of all of our communities. You had to come here, you had to travel, you had to pass the test, all the masks and everything. But it feels that people really want to travel and they want to socialize. And we don't know how long the pandemic will be here, whether it will be here for a year, 2 or 3, but we will have to find a way how to coexist with it. And I'm glad that GLOBSEC, again, somehow is setting the standards. And there will be some other events, international events, and we'll be happy to share our know-how on this. Actually, during these 2 days, we had 18 countries represented here in Bratislava, 12 ministers, two presidents and many, many distinguished guests who came here. And we had thousands and thousands of online participants worldwide. We really felt that people want to travel after the great lockdown and meet in person. And I have to tell you a story also during the great lockdown. I bought a world map to my wife. I gave her a dart and I said, throw this and wherever it ends, that's where I'm going to take you. Guess where it ended? It turns out we'll spend 2 weeks behind the fridge, but no, but I'll take her somewhere after that. Secondly, to a more serious note, I want to say that this pandemic is truly multidimensional and transformational crisis. We don't know how the world will look like after this crisis, but we know it will be very different because it accelerated so many trends. So if you want to see some clever things and read some clever things, I'm recommending some of our brochures, especially the GLOBSEC megatrends that you will find somewhere in the lobby on the post-corona world. But this conference here in Bratislava is a call to the world that we need to work together. We need international cooperation. Because during the pandemic, the world has closed down international borders, and we need international cooperation more than ever. Thirdly, I also want to say that on the sidelines of this conference, there have been many, many important meetings and side meetings, but I want to highlight one that was just reported in some of the media that the Greek and Turkish foreign ministers have met on the sidelines of GLOBSEC and they have agreed on the new round of talks. And media reports say that the atmosphere was wholehearted, open, very warm. So I hope we contributed at least during this pandemic here in Bratislava to the talks between Turks and Greeks. And I'm very glad about that. And finally, and most importantly, I would like to thank to many of the partners, organizers, and everybody who has helped us to make this happen. I have to say that this is the 15th year of GLOBSEC, and we have never faced a so difficult year. Some of my colleagues have been joking that this was more difficult than a computer game, like a Counter-Strike in the 10th level. I never played it, but actually this GLOBSEC was definitely more difficult. 10 years ago, we faced the Icelandic volcano, as you mentioned, Eyjafjallajökull. I remember the name very well. 2 days before the conference, and we had to cancel the conference. We had our people in different airports in Europe, and it was really a difficult situation. And we said to ourselves that if we will go through that, we'll go through everything. Well, that was nothing compared to what we had to go through this year. We had to postpone twice the conference, and we didn't know until very end whether we will be able to do it or not. It has been also very difficult financially, organizationally, logistically. You can't imagine how the organizing team that has been working so hard has been so resilient and so dedicated to make this happen, and I'm so proud of them. And I want to ask you to give them a round of great applause, because they have done this because of their resilience, they believe, and they all are my great heroes for this time. And I would like to mention some of them. First of all, Milan Solar, and I think after several months I can name him CAO, Chief Infectologist Officer, because I think he knows more about the pandemic than anybody else in this country. But also many of my colleagues like Kevin Karabin, Emma, Natalia Ronzíková, Natalia Rypáková, Daniel Hošták, Adam Horehaj, Lucia Milanová, Henrieta Kunová, Lucia Colníková, Rastio Martiška, Janko Fogaš, John Barter and his team, Alena Kucko, Jakub, and many others who have been working in our staff. And I would like to ask you for giving them great applause. But I would like to thank also to our key partners without whom and the support of whom we would not be able to do it. And first of all, it's Ivan Korčok and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because they believed us that we can do it until the very end. So thank you, Ivan. I would also like to thank to our national health experts who have helped us through this pandemic. Robert Mistry, Kian Mikas, Professor Jarčuška and many others, but also the companies who have supported us with PCR tests, antigen tests. Actually, I don't know if you knew, but the PCR tests that we used are Slovak. So they really were developed by Slovak scientists here. So it's also a part of the Slovak greatness that we've been able to bring these tests here. But also the Slovak Academy of Science, Lambda Life and Alpha Medical and all the great people who have been testing all of you outside. And I have to say that we had very low numbers of positive cases. Actually, from the foreign people and delegations, we have probably none. We had few among the interns before they joined, so the filter worked very well. But the low numbers are saying that even the corona was afraid of this organization, which I'm greatly thankful. So let me also thank to X-Lab and Life Park, who have been working hard to bring this conference to the world. For all of those people who have not been able to travel to Bratislava, and we've been able to connect them from different continents of the world. And we've been really trying to connect the physical sphere here and the virtual space out there. So maybe we had a limited participation here in Bratislava, but we had around 80% more around the world who have been following us, and I'm very, very grateful for all of those people who have joined. Well, we had to reinvent ourselves, we had to go through this, but I hope this shows the way for also other organizations and organizers. And I have to say, we would not be able to do it without all of you, without the support and without the belief in GLOBSEC, without the belief in this organization. So thank you for all who traveled here and gave us this great trust. Let me also mention one, and lastly but not least, is my great friend who believed me from the beginning, and my great dear colleague, Ambassador Rastislav Káčer, who is here with us. So thanks you, Rasti. With that said, I would like to thank you, and I'm looking forward seeing you next year. Hopefully, all physically, hopefully the pandemic will be over. But if not, we will fight it again. Thank you very much.